Good morning, Memorial Drive family. It is so great to be with you today. I'm just so excited to be able to be here giving this message, especially during the season of Advent. If you don't know me, my name is Connor Bryant. A little bit about me, real quick. I've been married for a little over 4 years at this point to my wife, Hannah Bryant. That's Hannah Bryant of the former Hannah Taylor fame. She's the daughter of Trent and Angela Taylor. Another cool thing about us is that Hannah is very pregnant. In fact, our daughter is due, our first child is due on Christmas Day, just a few short weeks away. And as you can imagine, as we have been going along this process, as we've been thinking about our daughter being born, as we get closer and closer, there have just been a whirlwind of emotions. There's a whirlwind of feelings and thoughts racing through our head. I mean, we are so excited and exhilarated to be able to hold our daughter for the first time. We've dreamt about her, we've prayed about her, we've talked about her, we've joked about her for so long, and we have so much anticipation for the first time of being able to hold her. I personally also have a lot of anxiety over the birth. Not as probably as much as my wife does, but as somebody who really struggles with control. During the childbirthing process, I don't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting, and so I have a lot of worry for my wife, and I have a lot of worry for my unborn child. You know, just emotionally, long term, I have a lot of fear of, am I good enough? Like, will I be the father that she needs me to be? Will I be the dad that God is calling me to be? And because because she could possibly be born on Christmas Day, it makes me it really makes me think, what was it like for Mary and Joseph? Now, it's not a one-to-one comparison. What would have been like for Mary and Joseph and what it's like for us. One, we have modern like miracle medicine in comparison to what they had then. But I think there's got to be some similar through lines in that reality. No doubt, I will give them the much harsher reality. For one, we neither Hannah and I are a teenager. Going through this, we don't have to leave home to give birth. We don't have to flee for fear of the repercussions of us staying in a particular place. They had it much worse. But it makes me wonder what it was like for them at the time that Jesus was born. I think so often about, what will I tell my daughter about 2020? Like, when you were in the womb of your mother, this is what all was going on. And I think the same thing must have been going on in the minds of Mary and Joseph for Jesus. See, Jesus was born into a lot, like, he's kind of born into like an action movie almost. Like, we all know the crazy details that lead up to his birth. We all know the crazy details that lead up to his birth. But one thing we don't really talk about is that Jesus is born into a people group, into a religion, into a culture that is being oppressed in a pretty heavy-handed way. Jesus is born in the province of Palestine some 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was born. And about 30 to 40 years before that, the Roman Empire became an empire. And historians will mark the date that the empire started they will mark that date as the Pax Romana. So from the time about 30 years before Jesus, for 200 years later, they label that era as the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. There is a unparalleled time throughout the empire's history that Rome has peace. There are no major large-scale warfares that they have to go on. There's some skirmishes here and there. There's some revolts they have to put down. But for the most part, there's no major conflict that they have to send people on campaign for. They don't have to send soldiers on campaign for. And that's pretty miraculous. Rome had, honestly, they had built their kingdom. They had gotten everything they had by conquering. And that wasn't an uncommon thing. That was just reality. If you wanted something back then, the reality was, I would just go and take it by force at the end of a sword from my neighbor. And Rome just happened to be really, really good about it. And so this was something the Romans were really proud of, the idea that their peace was throughout the world, was throughout their provinces, was throughout the people that they were governing. It was something that they would have held up as a remarkable part of their empire, this peace of Rome. For a Jewish person, For a Jewish person born around the time of Jesus, hearing about the peace of Rome would have been an absolutely ludicrous statement. As people being oppressed by the Romans, the Jews would have been faced with incredibly heavy taxes. They would have seen their own put to death. They would have seen their way of life corrupted by the Romans. For a Jew to hear about the peace of Rome infiltrating and making all things better, it would have been an absolutely insane idea for them. All they would have seen and all they would have felt was the chaos that Rome brought when they upended their life. And for the Jewish people, they were ready, they were anticipating, they were praying to Yahweh that he would deliver them from their Roman oppressors, that he would send a Messiah to rescue them from their current reality. We see one of these prophecies, one of these promises that they would have, that the Jewish people would have been excited about, that they would have really drawn upon in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. It says this, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end." And so Isaiah labels this person as the Prince of Peace. In the Hebrew, he labels him as the Prince of Shalom. You see, for most people throughout history, they have had the Roman ideal of peace. Peace is the absence of conflict. It means there's no major, large-scale bad thing happening to me right now. That's how I have peace. You see, the biblical view of peace is very different. Shalom, which we translate as peace, means the fullness. It means the completeness. It means the wholeness of what God intended things to be. And so when the Bible talks about shalom, it's talking about the deep understanding deep inside our souls that there is a completeness, a oneness, a wholeness. Things are the way that God intended them to be. And you see, so the Jewish people, they are anticipating that this prince comes. They're anticipating that this king will come and build his kingdom here and now, that he will reestablish the kingdom of Israel, and he will drive out the Roman oppressors at the point of a sword. In fact, this is something the disciples will draw on continually throughout the Gospels. It almost becomes comical. They keep almost expecting Jesus to throw off his cloak, and now he's going to be the guy who charges into battle against the Roman oppressors. And there are plenty of false messiahs, faux messiahs, who rise up around the time of Jesus to lead those sort of revolts, lead those sort of challenges. But Jesus is an entirely different kind of person. In fact, his life denounces the idea that we can ever bring peace at the point of a sword. Jesus, he builds his kingdom not by subjugating, not by forcing his will on others. He builds his kingdom by giving up his own life so that we can have shalom with God. You see, that's what Jesus does on the cross. We all know that in Genesis chapter 1, when we are in the Garden of Eden, when humanity is in the Garden of Eden, we are in full communion with our Creator. We're in full communion with God. And then after the fall, there's this separation. There's sin and death is separating us from God. And when Jesus comes and he gives himself up on the cross, he bridges that gap. He makes a way possible for us to live in the way that we were always designed to live. He brings us to a place of shalom. You see, we were created. Every fiber of our being cries out for the wholeness and the completeness of a relationship with our Father. Jesus brings his kingdom and builds his kingdom not at the point of a sword, but by his own blood. And Jesus will tell his own disciples, he'll tell you and me, that we are to be purveyors of his kingdom. We are to be people that take his kingdom by being peacemakers, by bringing shalom wherever we go, that we would be people that bring oneness, that be people that bring things about the way that God always intended them to be. Jesus comes not to build his kingdom at the point of a sword, but at the cross. Jesus comes to build his kingdom not at the point of a sword, but at the cost of his own blood. And the realization of that is that the thing that was always in need of mending, the thing that God always wanted to work on, Jesus comes and he bridges the gap and he makes it whole and he brings shalom into our heart. Going back early on in their message, I talked about how I don't know if there will ever be a moment of peace in our childbirth. I don't know if there will ever be a moment where like, oh, that was a really peaceful childbirth. As I've processed this, I've come to believe that that's not true. You see, when our daughter is born, when we hold our daughter for the first time, that will be a moment that is preordained by God since the foundations of the earth. That when we hold our daughter, there will be a unique oneness feeling. That before that moment, God had intended us to be two, and then there was this new moment where there was three of us, and we were a unit, and we were complete. That there was fullness and wholeness in that moment. There will be shalom. I have deep conviction and deep belief that in the midst of all the pain that my wife is going to feel, all of the fear and all the anxiety and all the stress, I believe at the end of it, the peace of God, the shalom of God will reign in our hearts. Jesus will reign in our hearts. And maybe for you, that kind of like, that's not that close of a thing. Maybe you don't have something like really big, like a childbirth on the horizon. Maybe you just find yourself in a really broken place. You just find yourself continually plodding along and coming up against the same obstacles. And you just find yourself continually in this place of brokenness. Here's where I think God wants to encourage us today. Jesus, the King of the universe, the monarch of the stars, comes into earth as a helpless babe, as a hunted child, to a teenage mother in just about the worst circumstances you can be born into. And not just he's born into that. Jesus, when he starts his ministry, will purposely seek out brokenness. He will purposely seek out the worst situations, and that is where he chooses to build his kingdom. And so for you and me, when we encounter brokenness, here is a perfect reminder for us that when we encounter brokenness, Jesus wants to rule over that place and in that moment and in those hearts. He wants to rule as the Prince of Peace in those. And he wants us to be purveyors of that kingdom. He wants us to be peacemakers in that situation for him. And even if we don't see it immediately, even if we don't think that the Prince of Peace is reigning exactly as we want him to in that moment, we can be rest assured that eventually he will reign in that moment. He will reign in those hearts because every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. My prayer for you, my prayer for your family is that during this time of Advent, you would experience that peace, that shalom, that fullness, that wholeness, that thrum deep inside of your being, that you know that this is the way that God intended me to be. God intended for me to have deep relationship with him, and this is the way I was created to experience it. So my prayer for you is that the Prince of Peace would reign in your heart and soul and life. Peace be with you.